Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figure It Out Productions. The following video is part of our Quick Shoot series. Hey everyone, welcome to the still unnamed Adam Koralik podcast. I am joined by my co-stars Chip Senkbeil and Remi Munier. I'm sorry, I suck. I can't handle accents. Chip, you talked about yourself last time. Remi, why don't you tell us a lot about yourself now, because you're brand new to the show here.
Oh yeah, totally new. Not much to say. I'm just French. And I watched your videos for a long time and wanted to just talk about stuff.
All right. I like that your defining attribute is that you're French. Like
Yeah,
that's the
that's who
first
I
thing
am.
that comes to your mind.
Well, that's a pretty good thing.
Can you pronounce your name? I apologize to every person out there. I suck at accents. I can't do them. I'm too American. If you watch like the latest episode of Playload, I got a package from a guy in Quebec, and his name was super French, and I butchered it to hell. But
Yeah, it was
Remi,
funny.
can you not only tell us your name, but possibly if you recall that guy's name, if you could say it correctly?
Oh, I don't recall his name. That's too bad.
Oh, it's all right. Don't worry about it then.
It's pronounced. I'm gonna do it the French way.
Oh, dude, it's super French, dude.
Remi Munier.
Oh man,
So good.
that was so French. It hurt. Like it was great. All right.
Pretty normal
No.
to me.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. All right, so anything else you want to tell anybody about yourself?
Not really.
All right, well, thank you for joining us on this podcast, and hopefully for future podcasts as well. Same with you, Chip, obviously, of course. So we'll just go ahead and go into the subjects now. Now, the first subject, this was your subject, Remi, so
Yeah.
why don't you tell us about it?
Recently with the PS4K or whatever they're gonna call them, and the XBox Scorpio, I was thinking, did they react to Nintendo with the NX coming along? Did they get scared or anything like that?
So basically, you're asking, are the PS4K and XBox Scorpio just reactions to the existence of the NX?
Yeah, basically.
Well, all right, so I'd say yes and no. I think that they probably would have done that eventually, but they might have pushed it up a little bit because of NX, because when they create these two things, they basically put Nintendo right back in the same position Nintendo's already in, where they have a console that's anemic compared to its competitors. NX could have fixed that for them by leapfrogging right over the Xbox One and PS4 and being like right on that competitive level. But then PS4K and Xbox One Scorpio come along and leapfrog it, and so like nothing really changes. We end up having like the second half of the 8th generation and not a 9th generation. It's strange, man. This is kind of unprecedented.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's unprecedented or not, right? Because to me, I view it more as like when the Xbox 360 launched, right? They had two different versions of the Xbox 360, both of which basically just had differences in what hard drive size, and I don't know if there's anything else really there. And, they had later models that were slightly beefed up, maybe a little bit more processing power. This still feels that way. To me, it feels more like a reaction to VR than it does to the Nintendo NX, because didn't both of them kind of... I know Xbox Scorpio, at least in their E3 video, was talking about how, and this will be to support VR, and like they kind of emphasized that for a little bit of the video, along with all the specs, right?
Well, the thing about Scorpio is that it is a full generation beyond Xbox One. Like, it's a 4K gaming console.
Oh,
Sure,
yeah.
but that's just graphical fidelity, right, and output. That's not actually, like, they keep claiming that this is going to have compatibility with the same games, which really kind of limits things. The same thing with the PS4 Neo or PS4K. They both claim that they're going to be able to play the same games. They're going to develop the same hardware for both. I can't really
Yeah.
see them taking advantage of it because, just because you have really good hardware, if you can't make a game that pushes that hardware because you're having to support the older version, then it feels more like a bump up just, to get the 60 frame rate that people want for certain games versus 30, versus actually being able to take advantage and really make, what would be considered a next-gen past Xbox One and PS4, right?
Yeah, it just seems kind of like almost like a next-gen console that happens to have really good backwards compatibility.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to
Sounds cool,
describe it
actually.
because we've never really had anything like this. The closest thing I can think of is there was a time when original Game Boy games would have extra lines of code so that they would run better on the Super Game Boy or the Game Boy Color. But but that was like really a minor thing. This is like a whole new animal. Like we've never really had anything like this. I think that in they'll do this plan where they have all the new games work on the older consoles for like 2 or 3 years before they're like, inevitably some developers like, I really at that point don't want to be trying to make my game run on like 6 or 7 year old hardware.
Yeah, that's what I think will happen actually.
Yeah.
I don't see them going full on compatibility.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, they didn't sound like they were doing emulation. It sounded like literally it was just going to support all the games, right?
Yeah, at least that's the plan for now.
And I mean, for how long?
Unless the developers, put their foot down and say, "Hey, we're just not going to develop for the original Xbox One or PS4."
Mm-hmm.
It really sounds like they're locked in. So yeah, unless you do something like, I guess when the 3DS came out and people could still play. Well, I think you can still do this. Play DS games on it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But people eventually moved from DS to it still only works on 3DS, and now they have what? Do they have like the new 3DS?
Yeah,
or
new
something?
3DS has a couple extra things in it. Yeah.
Which I guess maybe that's the closer one. 3DS to new 3DS. It's like, well, it's still a 3DS, but now there are only games that only work for one of them. But it doesn't feel like as much of a jump to me. Maybe it's because of being so used to each generation in the past has had some big impact, and to me, 4K resolution is not that big of a transformation. Granted, the Scorpio promises incredible hardware specs, but isn't there something that's supposed to be in between the Xbox One and the Scorpio as well?
I think you're talking about the S, but that's just a slim redesign. That's more like what you were saying at the beginning between the difference between Xbox and Xbox like One Core or whatever when the 360 launched. Mm-hmm. It's just a minor hardware upgrade in a few different places. Slim just models are nothing new. The Scorpio is on a whole nother level. The irony actually is that we now know more about the Scorpio than we actually know about the NX.
Yeah.
So to bring it back around to the original question, it's hard to say that it is actually a reaction to the NX since we still don't know that much about what NX even is.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I just think they just push it just to compete with the NX, actually.
You do?
Yeah,
I mean, it's not like it's hard to say because if we knew more about the NX, that would be an easier thing to say. But I mean,
oh yeah.
I think, honestly, my opinion, the PS4K and the Xbox One Scorpio are more of a reaction to the whole, the resolution isn't good enough, like all that stuff that people have been complaining about for the last couple of years.
Yeah, of course, but were they really trying to do it as soon?
I don't know. You could be right. It's only those guys would know.
They're large companies, Microsoft in particular. I can't imagine them making a quick decision on this, right? I imagine they had to have had these kind of things planned at least a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So I would imagine that they've had at least the Scorpio planned before the NX rumors started coming about. It might have been very, very early design stages, but I mean, I imagine like you were saying, Adam, as soon as people started complaining about this can't run 60 FPS, this can only output 720p for a lot of games, they're like, crap, we've got to do something about this. We need to make another big rendition to support these kind of things, and that's kind of where these came about. And then the timing this kind of happened where the Nintendo NX rumors were getting stronger, and then these came out, right? You can't with such large companies, you can't push something like that through. At least in my experience, it's like those kind of big decisions take a bit of time to get through all of the bureaucracy of the companies, right?
I agree. Remi, you got final thoughts on this, and then we'll move on to the next subject.
Maybe they were just releasing it when they thought it was ready, but we'll never know, actually.
Yeah. All right, if we're good on that one, then Chip, the next subject I believe was yours.
Yeah. So essentially, I've been kind of thinking, based on our discussion last time about Kickstarters and what makes what is good to help push an indie game in a Kickstarter and versus not. And I've been kind of thinking, what advertising do you and Remi feel is needed for an indie game to be successful? As in, is there a level of advertisement that you kind of need just to get people aware of the game? And then is there a point where you're spending too much time, just trying to fluff up the game and not focusing on just getting it finished and getting it out there, right? I've got some other points we can go into after this as well.
All right. Well, I think when it comes to your indie game being successful, it always helps when you have advertising, like anything. So the best advertising a lot of indie games get is just YouTube videos. So that I know this personally, a lot of them will blast you with like emails like, hey, do you want to play our game? We'll give it to you for free. Just make videos, which I never do that personally. But I mean, that is how things like Minecraft blew up. It also helps if your game is attached to other popular things. You know, if it's built into, like, what was that game? Ori and the Blind Forest. I think that was an indie game originally. And then someone at Microsoft, I think, picked that up. And then it became just a Microsoft title for the Xbox One. I think it's on PC as well. So sometimes you get lucky if a company backs you or YouTube backs you in some way. Or we talked before about the Dreamcast ones. Like sometimes an indie game will get a Dreamcast version, and then that'll help because then it gets press out of it. It's all about advertising ultimately.
And Remy, so with you being in France, does advertising for indie games, does that differ at all? Do you see mostly it being YouTube videos, people kind of playing the games or playing a demo of a game? Is that kind of what gets you interested in those games?
For the most part, yes, because there's not really much else.
Okay.
What do you mean?
Well, there you don't see in really French websites that much. There's some, but very few actually.
There's one good French indie developer. I'm gonna give him a shout out here. A guy named Orion. Remy, you got to support him, dude. He's from hometown. You got to represent.
Yeah.
He makes Dreamcast games and a Jaguar CD games.
Can you give an example or two of those?
He did Alice's Mom's Rescue. He did the one he's coming out with now is like a Dreamcast puzzle collection. It has like I want to say Yopaz and Ice Star or something like that. He also did a couple called like Ilancer and Philia. They were kind of like Myst games. They were very, very similar like that. I did videos on him a while back, but he's like the only dude making Jaguar CD games still. And he ports a lot of his stuff to the Dreamcast. Now he's an indie developer, and I think that's again the same thing where he puts it on these like more obscure consoles because then he'll get some press out of it. But every one of his games comes with a free PC version for anyone who wants it. But I don't see him ever trying to sell the PC version.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think there is a tactic to that. I think if that just went up on Steam, that it probably wouldn't do that well. I think it's just something that you have to kind of tie to something else that's popular. But, I mean, as much as I love Orion's games and his work, his stuff's never going to, like, blow up that way, like Minecraft style. You have to have some other hook to it. You have to have some other way to advertise. And, yeah, I think his is more of a passion situation. But, you know, some indie games can blow up if you just get the right publisher behind it.
Okay, so kind of tying into this, so far it sounds like both you and Remy kind of think that YouTube videos these days are the strongest form of advertisement and really the main one you kind of need to get people aware of a game and interested in it.
As far as indie games, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so you don't think, you know, depending on the platform of games coming out on, you know, whether it supports Dreamcast or some of, you know, one of the more obscure hardware from back in the day, or if it's on PC, right? So especially a lot of digital stuff on Steam seems to get lost these days. And then, you know, a throwback to retro consoles and even modern consoles like the Xbox and the PS4, that kind of stuff on indie games going there. Is there anything different you think you might see for advertising there, or do you think it's still primarily just YouTube videos?
For
basically the different communities, right? So do you think the community matters, like in terms of like what platform or platforms you're going to develop on, and who might, you know, the audiences that might be picking up games on those platforms might look for different mediums? You know, do you think it's just literally across the board, Xbox, PS4, PC, retro things like Dreamcast and the Jaguar CD, all those kind of things? You think primarily are still YouTube videos?
Yeah, for indie stuff, dude. Like, I mean, because that's the only advertising voice they really have. If you don't have a budget for advertising, I mean, you have to basically rely on YouTube and the community of those groups. So like, we keep going back around to it, but the Dreamcast, like if you put out a game on there, you'll get people in the Dreamcast scene advertising your game. which it may not seem that large, but it does get people's attention, and then they'll go out and buy it, digitally for Steam or Xbox One or PS4, etc. I think that, yeah, aside from, actually, now that I think about it, I think the only two ways to get an indie game to have like a successful campaign is you either do it through YouTube, that's where you advertise, or you're just lucky enough to get picked up by a big publisher. Unless you have, I guess the third option would be if you were like famous for one reason or another, like Inafune, right? He obviously does all the Mega Man stuff, and then he wants to go off and do Mighty Number 9. His name alone got him that. So that's a different situation, and then that game didn't end up being what people wanted anyway. But I think those are really the only way that indie games work out, at least on a financially successful level.
All right. Well, the only last thing I want to kind of bring into this then is spinning it around, right? So, do you think advertising differs in terms of what's needed with AAA games, right? Not saying what they do, but what they actually need to do to get people interested in their games and to pick them up.
Remi, what do you think?
Actually, I think it's very different from those because they have really a big budget to push it very far. But within the games, YouTube is just easier and more around.
Do you think it's just because you can see more of the gameplay, and you can see people actually trying out the game, and not just developers showcasing the canned part of the demo that they know works, but actually seeing people kind of play and mess around with it as you might do?
Oh yeah, I think that helps a lot because people interested in that kind of games really want to see what the game is like. But with AAA publicity, you just see really cinematic stuff like that.
That's a good point.
I mean, do you think that the cinematics are too much? Do you think they're even needed these days? Or do you think really they could cut down on their budgets a little bit and just focus more on getting demos in the hands of, popular YouTubers, getting them to play it? I know they already do this, but I guess the question's kind of turning into, are things like cinematic trailers and the canned demos you see the developers release on occasion, are those really needed these days, or does it seem more like everyone is looking forward more towards your ordinary person, even if they're a popular YouTuber, they're the ordinary person playing the game on YouTube or some other medium, right, and getting to see that firsthand as opposed to just watching a cinematic trailer?
I'm going to unfortunately say it's absolutely necessary because
I think so.
As much as we are all we're obviously gamers, and the people listening to us are likely gamers as well, and we're the ones who are going to go and research stuff on YouTube. We're going to go look and see what the gameplay is like. To Joe Schmo, who's just sitting there watching television, he needs that flashy trailer. That's the only thing that's going to get him to go and be like, oh, I should pick up the new Assassin's Creed or whatever it is, because that's what he needs. And then if the option exists, you can check out YouTube and see more detail and gameplay of Assassin's Creed or whatever it is. But those big trailers, they need those just for the masses, not necessarily for people like us. To us, it's just kind of a bonus.
That brings up one more point, though. So you mentioned, finding it on television.
Yeah.
Do you think television is still a relevant medium for people that are actually looking to buy games, or do you think as the generations get older that actually get games, like us, right? Mm-hmm. I know I don't actually have cable, so I don't actually watch television anymore. The advertisements I get are predominantly through YouTube and other online mediums, right?
It's still relevant, though it is definitely on the decline. Give it a few more years and it'll be not relevant, but for the time being anyway, there are still people that get their information that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's pretty much all I've got for the advertising, unless you or Remi have anything else you want to add to it.
No, I think, personally, I think we covered it. Remi?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well then our next subject comes from Corey Marsh. He said, with Microsoft starting to move towards a more PC-centric platform, do you think this will end consoles as we know them, i.e. closed hardware? Do either of you want to address this?
Oh, yeah, I do.
All right, bring it on.
I really think they are going to do more PC-centric platforms because consoles are really on the way out, especially with digital, all those. It's more logical for them to do it, it's way cost effective.
Mm-hmm. So I guess I'm in agreement. Yeah, because I mean, for if anybody's unclear, basically Microsoft seems to be kind of fusing the Xbox division with the Windows 10, I guess, division for gaming.
Oh God.
So basically, everything you do on Xbox One will be doable on PC and vice versa. It seems to me, I've been saying this for a while, that I think that their plan is to make the Xbox brand a service eventually. Now, obviously, they're coming up with Scorpio, but I think that's just kind of like a final endeavor for them, is my guess. I mean, I'd be thrilled to be wrong because I love consoles, but
Me too.
I think that that's the direction that they're going. And I do think that, sadly, Corey's probably right. We are probably coming to the end of consoles as we know them, and that whole model of closed hardware, and we're starting to change into, at least temporarily, kind of the cell phone model. Where you just kind of upgrade your consoles every couple of years. Although I don't know how long that'll last before either people get sick of it or they just go full digital in some other capacity. That's how I see it. Chip?
Might be just a fad.
Oh yeah, fad.
Well, so this definitely makes me think back. So I doubt either of you have a Mac, right? Both of you are
I
Windows.
do not.
I don't.
Yeah.
The only Apple product I own is the Pippin.
Oh, I'm
Is
so
Oh, me
sorry.
too.
Whoa! 2 people on the planet that have a Pippin?
Oh, you know, if you two met in person, the world would explode then. 'Cause that's how
Whoa.
it works.
So, see, guys, we didn't even know that about each other. That's pretty awesome.
Terrifying.
That's great.
Chip's scared.
Yeah. Please spare me. This poor.
It's like Googling
mere mortal.
Google. You just don't do it. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
But what I was gonna say is, okay, so actually the Windows platform has this too, but I'll start the Mac. So you kind of saw this weird merging, and I know this because of, I write software for a living, so I have to battle with this kind of stuff. A while ago, right, when the iOS platform came out, the iPhones, it's separate. It was a separate thing. And then you had the Mac, which was the old, operating system they've had for a while. It's been upgraded quite a few times. And they were separate. And then they started deciding, you know what, let's start merging the platforms together. It makes it easier to develop, and people that come from one will feel more comfortable in the other, right? So they did things like they added an app store to the actual operating system of Macintosh. And they've done some other aspects to kind of blend in the touch aspects. There's not actually like a touch platform on Mac, but they've kind of added some of the look and feel a little bit. On Windows, they've kind of done the same thing, especially with Windows 8 and Windows 10, right? With the whole adding the Microsoft Store and the whole tiling mode, which kind of came from their what are they called? Surfaces, those
The
things.
phones they did for a while.
And the phones they did. In fact, I have a friend that still works at Microsoft, and he was on the phone division for a while. And I remember him getting one of those phones, and there's never a single app that he actually wanted that was on that platform.
Oh, that's too bad.
Oh yeah, it was pretty sad. Interesting layout, but still pretty sad. But yeah, so basically, Microsoft and Apple, right, have both been slowly merging their different platforms together. Currently with mobile phones and their desktop environments. At least certain aspects, obviously not the whole thing. Windows has actually done more than Mac at this point, because Windows added the whole touch interface, because you have a lot of touchscreen friendly desktop displays and that kind of stuff built in. But they're slowly doing it. So I definitely view, at least with Microsoft, like YouTube been saying, blending in the Xbox further, right? It reduces the cost of development the more you have across the board, which Microsoft has the .NET framework that they use for everything these days. But it's blended across the board. Now, that's for Microsoft. For other platforms, I mean, Sony doesn't have anything other than the PlayStation, right?
Pretty much. And they make hardware, but
Yeah.
They make hardware, but the problem is hardware
Not as much.
these days, at least the hardware we see, is a lot of commodity hardware, which means you get a very low margin of profit from it, so it's a lot harder to kind of... No one wants to enter that market, basically.
yeah, they're actually trying to
totally.
leave it.
Yeah, everyone tries to leave it. IBM left it... how long has it been? I don't even remember now. But IBM left it a long time ago. They sold off their laptops. They sold off their servers like a year or two ago. At least their x86 servers. But a lot of people are leaving hardware as we know it, right? The current desktop model commodity hardware. Now, that could result in Sony just going, leaving the market. Nintendo after the NX, leaving the market. But there are other parts of hardware. We've had bad examples like FPGAs. There was that retro VGS thing.
Yeah.
That failed miserably
God.
because the guy had no idea what he was doing.
Coleco Chameleon.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah.
Which is sad because apparently someone did all the work to actually get all the systems working on that, but then
It's their marketing side of things didn't know what they were doing.
yeah. Well, I feel like the people that actually started it didn't know what they were doing. They just
This is a little side story. I promise we'll get right back to this. When I was at Too Many Games, they had a full mock-up box of the Coleco Chameleon.
They're still going at it. I
Oh.
thought they
No.
were done.
It was
saw
just
that.
a mock-up box, like a cardboard box, like
okay.
the box it would have shipped in.
Oh.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's very odd that they've done the effort to make a box that would be shipped in, and they went ahead and got the molding, which is the last thing you do, and then didn't really focus on the hardware or the business model or anything for that. It was very very odd. But anyway, coming back though, basically I think yes, consoles that today that were basically they're getting closer to PC architecture because PC architecture has gotten more and more commodity-like, so they can afford to do it. Whereas before, it was custom tailored. We need to get performance. PC architecture is just not performant for what we need, or it's way too expensive to do that. So we have a custom Z80 processor. We have a custom whatever, right, for these things. Now you don't really need that as much, at least for the games we see today. Things like VR, if that took off, which we've had our discussion in the last one about that, and FPGAs and other different kind of architecture that are not just a standard. Here's a processor. Here's a graphics card to offload work. Here's sound chip. That kind of stuff. If it's a little bit different, you might see new consoles appear, but I don't think they'll be at the scale that they are now, which is more of a mainstream type thing, right? Consoles definitely entered a mainstream for a while, and it feels like they're going to, like you guys are thinking, leave mainstream. But I'm curious if, maybe there might be a gap, but if down the road you'll see smaller consoles come out, maybe more, I wouldn't say hobbyists, but just lower scale consoles, maybe not power workhorses, right, like the Xbox Scorpio, but maybe ones that tailor towards 2D games or ones that tailor towards simplistic 3D games, like the handhelds you see, like the 3DS, right?
Yeah, so you're basically saying like the retro VGS, but done correctly.
Yeah, that could be one. Because I do think that had potential if they'd had people that, they had a good business model planned out, which I think you have to really think about what you're doing there.
Yeah.
But clearly, I've done some FPGA work a while back, but it's definitely possible. They have plenty of processors that are entirely emulated. They're called softcore processors in an FPGA because there's no actual physical processor. You just kind of wire things up magically in FPGA inside. But it's definitely possible. And I think if it's not an FPGA, it's going to be something weird like that could appear down the road. It just may not be... heck, if it takes long enough, we might not even recognize it as a game console. It might be something that literally, it won't be a video game console, but it could be a VR console, or it could be something else, right?
Or just like a little VR, or a little streaming box. Who knows?
Yeah, streaming boxes, it depends on... those still depend on how well the infrastructure
Oh yeah,
of the
no.
world gets, right?
We're talking years down the line here.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I still hold out hope that, because I'm a fan of things like the Open Pandora. I've got one of those floating around somewhere. It was for a background. Basically, the Open Pandora was they eventually got it to be entirely built in Europe. Different countries provide different parts, but it basically was an open standard Linux handheld gaming device. So you had a full Linux system on it. You had a full QWERTY keyboard, which is pretty weird, and then you could play a variety of games. You could even emulate games, which is what I used it predominantly for. But it had a bunch of games that were written for the Linux platform that could run on it too. So pretty interesting. But yeah,
Chip, you're making me look bad, man. That's all I'm saying here.
It's just one of those weird ones.
Yeah.
I'll have to show you that at some point if we ever.
Please do. So, short answer to that question, I think that they are moving towards a more PC-centric platform, and it probably will hurt consoles, but I think we all sadly see that one coming. Remi, any other thoughts on that?
Actually, like we said, the NX, they were talking about actually doing stuff kind of like PC, where you could add something that would bump it up. Maybe so. Nintendo is actually thinking of that too.
You're talking about an NX that's upgradable?
Yeah,
I guess that wouldn't surprise me.
There was a rumor that you could buy a separate box to
Just
plug
just
it in
add-ons?
and add power. Yeah,
That would make me sad, but I mean, like, I guess
Me
we'll
too,
see how that
but-
plays out. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the tough thing there is, that works for PCs because it's basically, you get an operating system that's generic and runs on totally separate hardware, right? But you have the NX, and it's like, okay, so now if you want to play this game, not only do you have to buy an NX, you have to buy the NX and this add-on that you have to plug in. It's like the Sega Genesis, or which one was it?
32X.
32X, right? And then the Sega CD and all those extensions, where it's like, okay, you can't just get it on its own. If you don't have one, you have to buy more stuff. And unlike a PC, where you can just upgrade every once in a while, unless Nintendo eventually offers like you can get the Nintendo NX and get the extension for those of you that already have it, or you can get this new one that actually has the extension built in or bundled or something for a comparable price, right?
Yeah, I guess we'll see. We should talk about that more when we have more information, though, because right now we're just speculating. But yeah, that would be intense if the whole console was basically nothing but add-ons. That would actually, I can't imagine that would be successful for them. So just got a couple of quick shout-outs we're gonna do here for people who are at the $20 tier. They get shout-outs. Thank you again, guys. We got Colin, who is just known as Colin, no last name. Thank you, and Kyle Vaughn, who actually just upped his pledge for next month. He'll actually be writing a subject for us that we'll talk about. But for now, Kyle and Colin, thank you very much for helping to support this podcast and the Patreon. I really do appreciate it. And now, the next subject, again, this is one of yours, Remi, so why don't you bring it up?
I wanted to talk about some consoles that really few people had because they bombed, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you know the JX4000?
The GX4000? I know of it. I've seen it.
Yeah,
in person.
I have one. It's not.
Of course you do.
Come
European.
on. It's not many people have that, even here.
Yeah.
Why did you get one later, or did you actually get one like after like when did you get one actually? Is the question.
Maybe a couple of years, if I remember correctly. Really, it was just for collecting.
Just
Yeah.
for collecting?
Yeah, I know how that is. That little
Yeah.
bug.
Yeah.
Well, the GX4000, all I really know about it was that it was a console by Amstrad, and it came out, I think, was it the UK only, or was it all of Europe?
Might be on Europe because I think my box has French in it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right, so at least we know it was released in Europe, at least parts of Europe, and it was supposed to be like, on a technical level, it was like near the NES, something like that, but they had a big shortage of games, so the console's not that hard to find, but finding games for it's like impossible.
Really hard.
I was in the UK a couple years ago, and I saw one boxed, like complete. They only wanted like 20 pounds, and I totally would have done it, but I had no way to get it back home. Otherwise, I totally would have bought that.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, it has 27 games in total.
Oh yeah.
And the majority of games were made by UK and French-based companies, such as Ocean, Titus, and can't pronounce this last one, Mauriciels. I don't know how to pronounce that one.
Is it French? Remy, help us out.
I'd like to give you the spelling for you to know what I actually was trying to say.
No, I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, apparently, interesting. Wait, RoboCop 2 is on there.
Oh yeah, I have it.
Really? How many of the games do you have?
Just about 5.
Well, that's better than either of us.
And it's pretty impressive. You basically have a fifth of the library, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Well, there you go.
Oh, interesting. They had light guns for this thing too. I'm just going through Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
have
it
that
was
one.
it was supposed to be like an NES competitor. It just didn't do very well.
It came out in 90, right? 1990.
Yeah, it would have been a late NES competitor.
Yeah.
It was released a little before the Genesis, actually. So it really had no chance.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, Genesis came out in 88 in Europe. Oh, no, in Japan. 89 North America. I don't know when it came out in Europe.
90 if I remember.
90 in Europe? So, yeah, it would have been around the same time you guys were getting the Genesis.
Yeah.
or Mega Drive. Sorry, but yeah, no, that would have been that's an awkward time to try and put out a console if
Yeah.
you're not Sega or Nintendo.
It was made by Amstrad. Was that like a computer company at the time?
Yeah. Well, the console is just a PC that they had. They put the guts into a console. That's all they did.
Yeah, I was mentioning this earlier to you guys, right? So the processor is a Z80, which is a pretty common processor back then. But what's amusing to me is the Game Boy, right, that came out in 1989, it had a modified Z80 to do a little bit more, and so basically the Game Boy, at least in processor, was more powerful than this home console, right?
Yeah.
That's too bad.
Yeah,
Just didn't have the
pretty
colors.
sad.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So the Game Boy, and I think Adam, you mentioned this at some point, was they had some extra code in there to support a single color on the Game Boy Color. So I think Pokemon, if you got Pokemon Blue, it was blue, and if you got Pokemon Red, it might have been red.
Yeah, some games had just a couple extra lines of code for extra things.
Yeah, it was weird because they literally planned ahead, I guess, because they just had like this address space that was reserved for that kind of stuff. I only know this because with a friend of mine, we were writing a Game Boy emulator at one point, but.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty odd architecture. It's one of those examples where, like I was saying earlier, right? They couldn't go straight to a PC architecture yet because they weren't powerful enough, and so they had to do weird tricks like modified Z80s and stuff just to get it to be performant enough to actually play decent games.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Remi, what other obscure consoles did you have a couple here on this list? Why don't you talk about them?
The FM Towns Marty.
Yeah, all right. The FM Towns Marty. What do you guys know about that?
Zero.
Well, I can tell you how the title screen looks like.
Do you actually own one?
Yeah, I have one.
Oh, I'm jealous.
How many games do you have for it?
Total 0.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That seems to be the common thing with FM Towns Marty's.
And it's not one that has built-in games on it, right? What system had built-in games?
There's a couple, like Master System had them.
There you go. Yeah, that's the one you were talking about earlier.
Just so we can tell people in case they're like, what the hell are we talking about? FM Towns Marty was a 32-bit, first 5th generation game console that only came out in Japan. And I don't think it did particularly well.
No, not really.
Yeah, that's why you've never heard of it. It's a weird name, you know?
Yeah, totally.
It really is. But yeah, what else do you know about it? Because that's kind of the extent of what I even know.
Well, what I know is that on the back, there's a button that says soften. It's actually just to have, even if you connect it with S-Video, which is what I used, it gave the look of composite.
Ugh.
Which, what?
So it just passes the composite through the S-Video port?
Might be.
Wow. Does it support RGB?
No, actually not. That's a bummer.
Do you know if it can be modified for it?
Maybe, but I don't know anybody that did.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, I mean, does it play music CDs?
Yeah, it can.
There you go. You got something to do with it.
Yay!
All
CDs.
right.
Have to find mine.
Chip's doing actual research. Nice.
Yeah, it's Wikipedia. Come on, it's great.
That's more than what I'm doing.
Oh,
So
I'm just
kinda
operating off of
reading.
memory here.
So Remi, you said you're using S-Video, but it gave you composite quality?
yeah, but you can just leave it how it was.
Huh. So what's interesting, it says that some FM Towns games were VGA only. So that makes me assume that there was VGA out somehow, or maybe certain models had VGA out.
Might be. Mine does not.
Yeah, the maximum resolution it supports is 720 by 480, which is a VGA, I think. So that's
Might be on
kind
the
of
model
weird.
too.
That's also kind of impressive for the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It came out, what, like 1990?
93, and like the
93.
Dreamcast, it only lasted 2 years apparently, and then they discontinued it. 45,000 units sold, probably not the best. I don't know what they
Not
for
really.
in Japan.
That's more than the Pippin got.
Oh, come on, the Pippin was just... No one's supposed to acknowledge the Pippin.
There are two people in this chat that
have
Pippin.
one.
La 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 la.
There's one of these things is not like the other, Chip.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
You're the
It's like
minority.
the Pippin fan club now. The Pippin Dream Team.
Yeah, that should just be the name of the podcast, the Pippin Dream Team.
And then with guest, right?
Yeah, with
Yeah.
+1.
Yeah.
Pippin
+1,
Dream
yeah.
Team +1.
Plus one.
Oh,
All
good.
right.
I'm so happy for that.
We'll look into that. All right, you got one other console on this list. Now, this one isn't as obscure, but you still put it on there, so I'm curious as to why. Go ahead, Remy.
It was the Neo Geo CD. It's not very uncommon, but I have just one thing that I hate, and I have to say I have the front loader model.
Mm-hmm.
The power cable is hardwired.
Ugh, that's always
Oh,
bad.
no.
I hated that, and the load times are terrible.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. What was it? I think it was Mark from Classic Game Room. At some point, I sent him. Was it the Mattel Hyperscan? Have either of you heard that?
I just actually my buddy Shane, aka Rerez, he's another YouTuber. He buys a lot of stuff like that. At Too Many Games, he bought a Mattel Hyperscan. I was like,
Oh,
you know, this thing's like
Oh,
useless,
God.
right? He's like,
Oh,
yep,
totally.
yeah.
So Remy, you know what it is too?
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah. Weird
Tell
thing
people
you, like,
quickly what it is, just in case.
Yeah, so it's basically a console made by, I think it's made by Mattel or
Yeah, it was Mattel.
someone.
Yeah.
Where basically you had these thick cards that you're supposed to scan, like swipe over them, and it's supposed to scan them to do various things. So, for example, one of the games is a fighting game with X-Men characters, and
That's
you
the
had
only
these,
game he got. Yeah.
yeah, and you had these cards, and you basically just move them over, and you'd be able to scan in different characters to play as. But the problem, well, many of the problems, one, the scanning was terrible. If you want to see a video of how bad it is, go watch Mark's video on it. He has one somewhere about it. But the reason I brought it up though was because I believe it's the Neo Geo CD. Remy, you're mentioning load times. He
Yeah.
compared the load time of the Neo Geo CD to that of the Hyperscan.
No.
And they were basically on par with one another. I think the Hyperscan
God.
managed to win by like maybe 2 or 3 seconds. But keep in mind that the time these systems came out, I think the Hyperscan came out in 2006.
Yeah, it was pretty late. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was basically a gimmicky, hey look, mother sees console in like a toy section. Kid says, oh, X-Men, and I think they had Ben 10 or something else on it.
Yeah.
And they have cards, let me do that. And then they get it, and they say, please, never listen to me again, right?
Yeah.
It was pretty weak. So yeah, the load times in the Neo Geo CD are pretty bad.
But they're worth it.
Yeah, because for the games, right? Now, which one
Yeah.
was it? There's one, and maybe Remy, you have this one. It's a game. I think it was it a shmup, where it has a long load time, plays an animated cutscene, and then goes back and loads again. And it's like for a spaceship
Oh.
or something.
Yeah, I think
And
I heard about it. No, I don't have it.
it's like one of the longest loading ones on the Neo Geo CD or something. I can't remember, but there's also a monkey that juggles because
Because why not?
That's the
Yeah.
loading animation. I'm like, it has nothing to do
Oh,
with
that
spaceships.
monkey kid that juggles. Yeah, that's Metal Slug.
Okay, so maybe it was that then. Maybe it wasn't a shmup. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's a run and gun.
But
I
yeah.
have it.
Okay, well, I do feel bad because I kind of jumped into a lot of these, and we didn't really get to your point though, Remy. Of you were asking like why they flopped. We kind of talked about their hardware.
That's what we do. We're nerds.
Oh yeah.
Oh, by the way, I want to give you props for picking 3 consoles I don't own.
Yeah, but
Oh,
Good job. I don't own any of those. Shut up, Chip. I got a Pippin.
Hey,
Pippin.
yeah.
I've got an open Pandora. It's somewhere.
Pippin. You can't be in the cool club without a Pippin.
Dang
On
it.
his chat, there's
All right.
2 Pippins.
It's okay. It's all right. We'll let it go.
Two cool
Yeah,
people.
we can
and
call you
plus one.
Chippin.
That's
Oh,
Chippin.
please don't. Please don't. That'll stick. That'll stick, and I'll be regretting
Yeah, that'll
that.
stick. Don't worry. Don't call him Chippin.
Please don't. Have mercy.
All right. But yeah, no, he's right. We didn't really talk about why they flopped. So, did you have any special? I guess we kind of did with. Well, I guess you pick it up pretty quickly with.
4000.
GX 4000 only comes out in Europe at the wrong time. FM Towns Marty only comes out in Japan at the wrong time. Neo Geo CD, I would assume it's just because of the price tag. SNK stuff is always insane.
Yeah. And you like we said, there was load times that you did not have with the AES.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the price for that one, I mean, Adam, didn't you kind of say that with SNK they weren't really gunning to enter and disrupt the other existing, Sega, Nintendo? They were just kind of saying, hey, for people that like our systems and you want the same experience at home, you can pay out and get this thing, right? It wasn't.
Yeah,
They weren't really.
that's how it's always seemed. Like they offered you like the Rolls Royce alternative that you could have if you had the money. That's how the AES always came off. The Neo Geo CD, it almost seemed like a half attempt to fuse the two, but have a cheaper Rolls Royce, but also kind of be competitive. But I don't think that really worked because you were probably getting the better experience on the AES, or you just weren't willing to put up the money for the Neo Geo CD. In the end, didn't the Neo Geo CD only have like 89 games or something?
You apparently already know this because I have no idea. You just threw out 89, and that sounds like a good number.
Yeah, well, I thought it was 88, and then
is.
like they added Last Hope was an independent game that got put on there, and I think that's it. I could be wrong, but I think that's it.
I think it is too.
Yeah. So, as per usual with these consoles, it comes down to price, marketing, and quality of games and how many of them there are. Neo Geo CD, I assume you would agree, was probably the best of those three consoles.
Oh, of course.
But even with that library, you can't overcome price and marketing. So
The only way for me to get Metal Slug.
yeah, exactly. Unless you buy later, you get like for the PlayStation or any of those like collections or whatever.
Yeah, but I wanted it on SNK.
And I don't
console.
blame you, man. I'm that kind of nerd too.
What is SNK doing now?
They were bought up by Playmore a while back, and now I think they're just a name that they throw up on some developments. Like they use their IPs for like new King of Fighters games. I don't know how much of the conventional classic SNK still exists.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I saw, was their Neo Geo X thing.
That they didn't make that. They just licensed it. And
They
then
licensed it out?
They
Okay.
actually sued the people who made it for like low quality standards.
I've never heard ever of a good licensing for hardware. It
Yeah.
always has been tragic. I mean, I could go in history, but
Save
It's
it.
true.
Well, next podcast we'll talk
Yeah.
about it. I swear it's a good
yeah,
one.
we'll save it.
Yeah. All right. So, is there anything else on that subject, guys?
Not for me.
Chip?
Nope.
Nope. All right, then, Chip. We will kick it off here to your second subject. So why don't you lead us off here?
Okay. So basically, we've already kind of hinted at a couple of failures, right? I mean,
Yep.
we just talked about some failures, which is a good segue. But basically, I'm kind of curious, both from you, Adam, and you, Remi, if you were in a position of developing a new game console, right? And don't think of like, oh, this has to be able to be maximum graphics, everything else. It has to compete with the Xbox Scorpio and the PS4 Neo and the Nintendo NX. Just think, you're just going to develop a new console and you want it to succeed, right? What decisions would you make with the intent of trying to get it to succeed, or what decisions would you at least avoid, right? Like what things would you make sure not to do? So either one.
Is there a timestamp for this? Because, like, unfortunately, the time you're asking this, the entire hardware model is changing. So it's a little different. Like, if you had asked this question of us even like 5 years ago, it would have been more a standard type of answer we could give you. But now that they're kind of changing to like this almost cell phone model, it's harder to say because it's no longer like the old rules are kind of being thrown out.
Yeah,
So-
well, okay, let's try. I'm just curious to hear from both of you. Let's try if you had to do it today, as in
Okay.
you had to do something. It doesn't have to be incredibly successful, but it has to be sustainable, right? Today.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm kind of curious, if you seem to have a different mindset of what you do, maybe pick a point in time that you think you'd be more confident entering, and then what you do there, right?
Well, so here's the thing. I would probably write all my qualifiers in one way, knowing full well it would fail because of the current times. So like, some of the standard ones you do is you got to make sure it's not too expensive because there's breaking points in that. So you have to understand that the hardware has to be locked to a certain cap. You also want to make sure the console is developer friendly. You want to have good relations with third-party developers. I mean, that's not a hardware thing. That's just going out and making sure you schmooze the right people so that they like you enough to actually make games for your stuff. You got to make sure that you have the right kind of localization teams in place. You have to make sure if you're an American company that you have like here. If I was Microsoft, what I would not have done was try to brand the Xbox in Japan as Microsoft. I would have approached Sega or some other, I don't know, would like some other Toshiba maybe, some other Toshiba's Japanese, right? Some other Japanese company and let them distribute it because that's the only reason the Apple Pippin saw even any moderate success in Japan was just because they didn't put their name on it. And then there's very few companies that can succeed there that are not Japanese. So you got to think about things like that. I think those would be a lot of the moves I would make.
So mostly just towards distribution and
yeah, I would
that kind of
focus.
stuff.
Yeah, well, the thing I focus most on is marketing and distribution and just making sure it gets to the right people. Hardware division's not as much my thing, but I would guess I would give them a cap and say, like, we need it to cost this much, and we would like to ideally be the most advanced piece of tech this generation within these confines. I don't know if you can commit to that, but if we're selling, it ultimately doesn't matter.
So you're targeting. You're still going towards. You want to be the most advanced. That's your goal. Advanced, developer friendly.
Yes, but financially competent, financially reasonable. It supersedes the tech superiority.
So what to you would be financially reasonable?
I don't think you should ever make a console above $500. In fact, if you can hit that $400 point and still be relevant, then that's ideal. That's one of the reasons the PlayStation 4 did so well right from the get-go. It was $400, whereas Xbox One was less advanced because of the Kinect and was more expensive because of the Kinect. And that was a mistake. Like, I would not shoehorn in weird gimmicks like that. That would be a no-no for me. People constantly say they want just a straightforward console. They don't want any weird gimmicks. So the Wii U forced you to have a gamepad. As much as I like the gamepad, people didn't really, want it. People didn't want the Kinect, but they did like the PlayStation 4 again because if it was just standard. And that's apparently what people want in their console. So when it comes to things like VR, I think I would give you the option, but I would never say, all right, our console is VR centric and every unit has to come with a VR headset, because I don't think that would be successful nor financially viable.
Now, so you're not Sony, you're not Microsoft, you don't have a big name. So
Correct.
Do you think a name would be a problem to enter at this point?
I was kind of operating under the assumption that whatever fictitious company I am is somewhat successful already. If you're telling me hey, Adam, literally it's just you, go out and make a new thing, well, you're going to end up with the retro VGS. It's just going to be, hey, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. This is not going to work out. So if you have a big name, if I was Apple, let's say that, if Apple wanted to get back into game consoles, then they have the right infrastructure for that. Their name alone could get them really far on that, and that's always that's important. That's like free advertising, just your name being a household word.
Remi, what about you? So if you were going to make a new console, do you think releasing it or focusing it in France or at least in Europe first, do you think that would be an interesting pool compared to basically North America and Japan are the two places for these other consoles, right?
I actually think it would be better to just put it in the US. It's obviously a big market. You can make lots of money right there. You can't really do that if you're going for Europe because it's too big.
Too big as in too fragmented? Because US is quite large, but it's it's single language, kind of.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. It's just basically everybody speaks the same language. You all use the same electricity, but in Europe, it's not always the case. And if you're gonna ship consoles there, you're gonna make specific consoles depending on where it's going to be.
Yeah, the other thing is, history has tried that a few times, putting consoles out focusing on Europe. It has literally never worked.
Yeah, I know, Adam, you talked about, globalization being a pretty
That's an important
factor,
one, dude.
right?
That's a big one. Because if you get those, let's be honest, there are three primary markets for video games. And as they currently stand, it's North America, Europe, and Japan.
Hey, come on, man. Brazil, rocking the Sega Master System.
That's exactly. They're keeping Master System alive, but getting a PS4 in there is difficult. No, and then there's Australia, but they're even though they're nowhere near geographically to Europe, they're just considered part of it as far as video games is concerned for some reason. But it's so if you can be successful in all three of those markets, you automatically win. Which is why it's always hard for Microsoft because they default can't win in Japan, just ever. And then North America, Microsoft can win, and sometimes they have. And Europe tends to go over to Sony's side, but they're kind of the most neutral. But though, Remy, I'm sure you could tell us more about that.
Where really everybody I know is PlayStation 4 right now. But for every person that I know that has a PlayStation 4, I always know someone that has an Xbox One. I don't know why, but it's always mixed. It's always about 50-50 for us.
Exactly, because they don't have a dog in that fight. You know, I mean, one could argue that the reason that Sony does so much better in Japan, and actually it's not even really an argument, is because it's a Japanese company. I mean, that's proved time and time again. Non-Japanese companies do very poorly in Japan. Like, did you guys know there are games, like Western games, like the Lego games, for example? Those are made by WB Games, but they're distributed by Sega over there. They're WB Games. Yeah, WB Games isn't even mentioned on there. And the reason for that is just there's something about the Japanese market. They just don't have any interest in non-Japanese products unless you're Apple or Coca-Cola.
How interesting.
Yeah,
I wonder if China is going to be a bigger market down the road. Because didn't they just like allow consoles to enter China a couple of years back?
Yeah, they're getting there. The thing is, China could dominate now that they're kind of changing how they're letting more movies in. It's really all that for them. It's just about the politics. Like, as soon as they get over that mental hurdle and they just legalize letting other companies come in and make stuff, they will overtake the U.S. as far as like the dominant market. And, I mean, they're already starting to do that with movies.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of time.
Do you think China would? Do you think they just start investing in companies locally that would start if they saw video game consoles as an actual market to enter? Do you think they just push some of their own companies to just do that instead? Do you think it'd be?
It's entirely possible, but I mean, they unfortunately, as far as video games are concerned, I think China has a really bad reputation with video games. Like, when we all think of a Chinese game console, isn't it immediately like, oh shit, that's gonna be bad?
Yeah, knockoff, which is pretty sad because they have some really good quality hardware development in China.
Oh yeah, for sure.
These days they have to because everything is produced there. I mean, all the big factories are there, so they have. Depends what you pay for. You either get the knockoffs or you get the really high qualities.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they can't do it, because they totally can. I'm just saying their current reputation makes them seem like they don't know what they're doing, and that's just because of different issues. It has nothing to do with their actual abilities.
You're saying for people, if they made one and tried to sell it outside of China, basically.
Oh, yeah. If they tried to make one that was actually like a global competitor console, I'm confident they could do it. And probably do it pretty well. But they are also, it'd be interesting to see how Sony and Microsoft products would do there. In fact, I bet you Microsoft would do better, because the Chinese don't, I hate to say this, but they don't dislike us as much as they dislike the Japanese. So they may not be as interested in Sony products as they would be, say, Microsoft products.
Okay.
It's like half politics and half marketing, dude.
Yeah, especially with, there's a lot of politics involved now.
Yeah, and I would like to see another European company come back and make a console. We haven't seen one since, what, was it Commodore did one? It was the CD32, I think, was the last European game console.
How long ago was that?
93?
Wow.
Like, I can't think of anybody else out of Europe that's done one since.
I mean, do you think it's because of what Remi you said in terms of like just the fragmentation?
Might be, but maybe we just have already what we want, so nobody just thought about doing something specific.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of those consoles came about from computer companies, right?
Oh, yeah. Commodore, Amstrad, Philips.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's definitely interesting. Yeah, you definitely don't see, a brand new company come out these days, or even back then, really, and say, hey, our first thing is going to be a game console. It's basically, a lot of companies were like, let's try this now and see how this works. Sony, Microsoft.
Yeah. Hell, that's even true with Sega and Nintendo.
Yeah, because what did Nintendo do?
They were a toy company first.
Yeah, toy. There you go. Yeah.
Toys and cards, and then eventually they got into video games. Sega was always about video games, but they were largely about arcade hardware when they were service games.
Mm-hmm.
They took them a long time before they did a console. I mean, Service Games was founded in 1948? It's been around for a long time.
Yeah. Okay, well, I still have one more point if we have a little time left.
Of course,
to kind of go into. So we've kind of talked about distribution and that kind of stuff, and also cost. We haven't really gone to hardware. We'll kind of leave that out though, because it sounds like that's not really much of a focus. But I'm curious as to.
Dude, if you got a specific hardware point to make it.
No, we'll leave that for another time.
Okay.
But I am curious as to I'm going to paint a couple of different examples here. So you've got things like the Ouya, right, which failed for several different reasons. But it was a Android-based device, so it would literally just play games on Android. But because it was also Android, and there are emulators on Android, technically you could have a home console that did emulation, right?
Yeah.
So
You could.
that's a low budget one that was basically mobile and emulation. You've got the consoles today like PS4 and Xbox One that if anything for emulation, it's basically Xbox One emulating 360 games. Is that right? Don't they offer that?
Yeah, it doesn't run them natively. They had to like rewrite them through emulation through the Xbox One.
Right, and PS3 kind of did that at one point when they went from built-in hardware to emulation to nothing or something.
Yeah, they did
PS2.
full-on hardware with the launch models, stripped it out, and then put in emulation for a bit, and then stripped that out. I'm not sure why they stripped out the emulation. If it was already built, like, what was the problem?
Maybe it was just they didn't see that much use out of it, and it wasn't cost effective to maintain a team to work on the emulation. Since it sounds like it was basically game by game emulation, right?
Yeah, I know, but like, all right, I know we're getting off subject wildly
Hey.
here, but yeah, I know it's kind of our thing. But like the Xbox 360, they had the Xbox Originals program set up, but they never finished it. But they didn't like undo it and get rid of all the games that were compatible. That's the part I don't understand. If Sony had a bunch of the games compatible on the PS3, why did they undo that?
Yeah, it's a bit strange.
Yeah, it's definitely a good question. It really depends, which we don't know this, right? It really depends on technical reason would be something like if depending on how they built it, right? If it literally caused problems for other parts of the software, where it literally was just not maintainable to upkeep. Because depending on how you write it, it's not just like, well, we finished it, it will sit there forever. Sometimes if you write software, you have to go back and like tweak things or refactor, and it just takes more effort than you'd expect just to keep it going.
See, that's why we got Chip. He knows what he's talking
Yeah.
about. Not just making stuff up like me.
Well, didn't they just have like some lawsuit finish about like them removing Linux support as well in PS3?
Yes,
Or
yeah.
something?
If you have one of those older PS3s, which I actually do, which I actually never updated because they were going to remove that,
Interesting.
you could actually claim some money out of it. I'm not going to because I don't really care.
It's not that much money. And
It's like
so,
$9, and
Yeah.
it's just like it's a bunch
It's more the principle, although it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. The legal team's getting like $4 million or something from it. I can't remember.
Yeah, that's kind of how that works, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I was kind of sad. I was going to put Linux on mine, but then I found out the one I bought, they'd already removed that stuff from it, so I couldn't do it.
Yeah, mine has not been updated because of that. It still has that option. But I haven't. I only use it for PS2 games because it's got full PS2 support.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's kind of like why it doesn't matter if I update it or not.
Okay, but anyway, I mentioned
Sorry.
emulation. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Remi?
No, I was just apologizing for getting us so wildly off subject. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was basically saying, so I mentioned emulation because I'm kind of curious. Okay, so ignoring the hardware itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
You make a console, and you're going to try to distribute it out to the global, it sounds like. I'm curious as to what kind of things it'll support in terms of, is it going to support games made specifically for itself? Is it going to be a console that runs something like Android, where it can kind of pick up those games? Is it going to offer emulation for old systems? Like, is there a legal problem with that? Because I don't actually know how Open Pandora, I guess because since it just marketed itself as a Linux game, handheld game system or something, then it wasn't really their fault if people did emulation. But I'm kind of curious as to what things would you put into the system for developers and consumers to use, right?
Oh, that's such a good question. But my answer completely depends on what company I am. See, if I'm Microsoft, Xbox One comes out with at least original Xbox support, and it comes out with Xbox 360 support. But if I'm Apple, I'm not going to bother throwing Pippin support in there.
Of course not.
Oh, come on. I mean,
No,
you two would love it.
I know the chipping needs to happen, but
No.
Yeah, be careful, man. You're playing with fire. But no, just because they don't have enough of another game history. But like, I assume Apple has all sorts of games they've been able to sell on iOS, and they must have like accounts that are tied to that. If I was Apple, I would say, all right, if you log in, unless there's some legal reason they can't do this, then a lot of those games get kind of ported over. But if you're like company X, it's like a brand new company, and you have no history of games, maybe you have to start with your own software, or maybe you start with something Android based. I don't know exactly. Because any one of those options, you just kind of have to find like the least bad option, in my opinion. Because if you don't own like a library, it's harder to offer that to people. But if you are your own company and you're just telling people like out of the gate, hey, like the Ouya, for example, if they were just like, hey, we don't own Nintendo products, but our console comes with Super Nintendo emulators, you kind of risk not being taken too seriously by your competitors because you just come off like some sort of pirate console.
Yeah, I don't know if did they actually market that? I was just kind of saying that you could do that.
I don't know if they marketed it, but they sure didn't stop it.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just an Android. Well, I can't remember if they might have made their own wrapper store around what was called the Android Marketplace, but
yeah, I don't know, man. Again, it's all about marketing and it's about image here. So if your console is the one that is like the Ouya, where it does that out of the box, it just looks like some little pirate console. It doesn't really look like something that can be taken too seriously. Mm-hmm. Ironically, if you have your own console's like its own software and its own setup, even though it has no backlogged games readily available, it can be taken more seriously because it seems like everything you're making just for it.
Right.
The best of all worlds is if you're already pre-established and you find a way to kind of tie all previous game purchases or whatever to your new hardware. But obviously that's a tall order.
Yep. Remi, do you have any thoughts?
Really, I don't really would want that to happen because depending on what you want to do, it really depends on what you are on the beginning.
What do you mean you wouldn't want what to happen? You would want emulation to happen?
Yeah.
So, as in, like, you wouldn't want to support. I mean, clearly, the whole piracy problem with, there's like a certain. Isn't there like a certain time with after you go beyond a certain time period? It's like public domain for some of these.
20
things?
years
Yeah,
generally.
20 years. So ignoring old system generation, but what about like if you supported Android or something? What do you think about that, Remi?
It could be good if it's cheap. If you can do it properly for not that much, it just might be a plus.
Might be a plus. But it sounds like, Adam, you think that could actually harm it.
I do. Look at it this way. If Microsoft announced, hey, Super Nintendo's over 20 years old, today we're announcing a new Super Nintendo emulator for the Xbox One, you'd all be like, well, that's really cool. But then at the same time, you'd be like, isn't that kind of like messed up? Like, isn't there some legal issue there? Even if it's not, it just comes off as strange.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just feel like that would be awkward. And anytime you have a console that is playing other consoles' games without the permission of the original console manufacturer, it just seems illegit. Like, I didn't like the Wii, but one of the great things about it was the virtual console where you could go back and actually get all these things like through the permission of those developers. Now, granted, I wouldn't do that because I have a lot of the original hardware and stuff, but I liked that they had officially put it all under one roof. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of worked for the Wii specifically because so many non-conventional gamers ended up buying that thing to like relive childhood, I guess.
Yeah, I actually got a couple of games from that purely because I didn't have the hardware to play some. Like, I think I played a game with a couple of my friends. It's like a 5-player game called Lode Runner, I think, which is pretty fun. Have you heard of that, Remi?
Yeah. I've played with friends. I think once.
Yeah. So it's weird though because this is off subject though. It confused me. So when I first got the game, granted I saw the screenshots. It looks like a Nintendo game or something. I don't know what platform it was actually for, but the name that I knew of with Lode Runner was some sort of remake for the PlayStation, and it was completely different. But it was pretty fun. But yeah, so I used that a couple of times just for party games, right? Where it's like, I can pay $5 and get it on the Wii, and we can wave our magic wands around and do something. But that was basically it for that.
Yeah, so like the Wii had the ability to do that officially, and it felt. This is hard to describe, but it sounds like if you bought it officially, it somehow seemed just
more professional.
Yeah, exactly, more professional. But at the same time, that same console, the Wii, you could hack the crap out of that and have it play all that stuff unofficially. But then it's it's hacked, and it's hacked. And
Yep.
I just feel like if you made an entire console with that premise, it's just hard for. It would be cool, don't get me wrong, but it would just come off as illegitimate as a real competitor.
I get what you're saying. I think I kind of leaned more that way. The Open Pandora to me felt more like not a hacker's console, but I mean, if it boasts Linux operating system as its system on the Pandora, then it's definitely it's definitely catering towards a very small group, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I do have one last thing
Sure.
with this, kind of to throw it in for both of you. So, Adam, you've mentioned, okay, streaming boxes, that kind of stuff. Of course, the digital media you have now that you download, disc-based media for basically all the current consoles. You've got cartridge-based for the old systems and the handhelds still. If you're going to make a new console, and it's going to have its own library of games, right? What medium would you use? And this can factor in things like the cost to make them. It can do with your own principle of what you'd like it to have, what you think would work these days in the market, all that kind of stuff.
Again, it depends on when this is happening. If this is happening now, I actually think those rumors about the NX using some sort of iteration of cartridges were smart. I mean, like the 3DS style cartridges, not like the conventional N64 style. That's what I would go with, because then you have the potential technological advantages of having all of that data on one little device. There's no massive download times, but I would also leave space in there for updates and things so that you can update to the card. And I then at the same time you satisfy people like me who just want to buy physical things. That's personally how I would do it. I would not go with disc-based media.
And you do cartridge-based, at least the 3DS style, instead of digital only. Even though I know
I would
you're not
offer
a fan of it.
digital because I recognize that a lot of people really like that, but I would have both at the same time.
Okay.
Kind of the way the current consoles do it, except instead of a disc drive, it'd be the cartridge slot.
It'd be interesting if you did something like SD cards, which are off the shelf available and produced on demand, right? So maybe ups the cost a bit, but you don't have to worry about producing too many copies of a game and then having them left over, right?
I don't know if I'd go with straight SD cards, but its own proprietary thing, kind of like 3DS cards. But again, then you run into problems with things like EverDrives, and you'd have to figure something out about that. But that's why you got a piracy team in place.
Well, I mean, okay, so do you? This is another tangent, but do you care about piracy that much?
It depends on when it happens. Like, if it happens while your console's highly relevant, then it becomes more of an issue. It depends on how easily it's cracked. If it's only like a handful of individuals that can do it, it's not that big of a deal. But if it's like widespread, like imagine, all right, so the Sega CD, right? It plays anything. Like, if you play burned games on it, no problem. You can rip it real easy. If I launched a console that, like, imagine if everybody had CD burners when the Sega CD came out. That would have been a huge issue for them, like right out of the gate. At least with Dreamcast, it took a little bit of time for people to crack that. So it depends on how readily available the masses would be able to pirate it. Ultimately, in the end, it doesn't matter. Somebody will break it. It's just about how long you can prevent that.
Yeah. And you have to remember, someone that will crack a console would have never buy for it in the first place.
Yeah, the problem is, though, that they crack it for other people as well.
Yeah, I can actually remember when I had a PSP. I bought a couple of UMDs. Those things sucked so much, by the way. But
Not a fan?
Not a fan of UMDs.
I know
they
the
felt very
feeling.
fragile.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a PSP Slim, so it was the 2000 model. They had three models. They had the 1000, which is the fat one. They had the Slim, which is 2000 model, which is, in my opinion, the best one. And then they had the 3000. And it's kind of weird. So this is one of my first ventures into messing with a console. And I'll keep this short. But basically what you do is to hack it is you get to open up the battery and cut a trace on a circuit board. And you could instantly run unsigned code on the PSP, which means you could basically install any PSP game you wanted and play them all, right? You could pirate any PSP game. And as soon as I did that, right, I stopped buying the physical games because the media was so weak to me and so fragile, and I wanted to try so many games that I think I bought maybe 3 games after that that I actually wanted to support the developer. Other than that, I basically pirated in high school for this, right?
I think that's a common problem with the PSP, because you go to like any kind of store or swap meet or whatever with video games, PSP games are worthless. Like, absolutely worthless.
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants them.
it was another reason I did this, right? It was kind of sad. So the UMDs, right, disk-based, these weird little tiny disk-based things, had longer loading times than if you put the game on a memory card into the PSP because it was faster. So by hacking the PSP and pirating, you got better quality of your games, right?
Yep.
And so that's another reason I just kept doing it instead of actually, getting more UMD games. Even though I like to collect a lot of different systems, PSP is just one I haven't done because I'm like, why would I ever do this? I can just put it on a flash card and play it that way, and it runs better.
Dude, save this subject: piracy versus not piracy. Like sometimes when piracy works out, that needs to be its own topic.
Yeah, okay.
Because
then.
There's definitely stories we could tell.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, save that one. Write that down. That's a good one.
Okay, well that's pretty much it for me on this. Unless either of you had more comments on the fiscal. Actually, I didn't really get to ask you, Remi, what you thought about fiscal, or like what kind of media you'd use for this.
Basically, I'm with Adam on this. I would really think the little SD cards would be the best. It has everything you need.
Okay. So wait, would you actually go with SD cards, or would you try to go something proprietary like the 3DS cartridges?
I think it would depend on what's cheaper.
Oh, SD would be cheaper. Problem with SD, though, is that it would be cracked much more easily.
Yeah, because you don't have any really hardware protection, because everything can use SD, so it'd basically be up to encrypting your games on it, right? Providing some sort of key, and those things can definitely be broken pretty easily now, depending on how well you encrypt it.
That's another one of those marketing decisions you have to make. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to make a call? You going with SD or you going with proprietary?
I think maybe proprietary would be better.
All right, Remi's made a call and thus it is spoken.
The Pippin Dream Team unite, right?
Chip in, chip in. You can't. Yeah, man. You have to get one now just because of your name.
Oh please! Yeah. I've seen the prices on those things. It's
Dude,
ridiculous.
Get one from Japan. They're much cheaper.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but shipping's expensive from Japan.
It is, but just do it anyway. Don't even think about it.
Of course, don't think about it.
Yeah.
Now you
spend
can.
money.
Yeah, just do it. Just do it. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I want to thank Chip and I want to thank Remi for joining us. I was going to call you Chippin, but I didn't want to do that to you. But then I did it anyway. All right. Yeah. Thank you guys for joining us on the podcast. It's been awesome, and we'll see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.